A Russian presidential advisor just accused the United States of preparing a crypto-based plan to deal with its $37 trillion debt. And the wild part is how much of it lines up with what the US is actually building right now. That claim didn't come during a calm moment. It landed right after the US moved from $37 trillion to $38 trillion in just over 2 months, one of the fastest trillion-dollar jumps on record. So when Russia suggested the US might be using crypto to manage its massive debt, the claim didn't come out of nowhere. The pieces were already there, just not connected yet. Which leads straight into the big question. Is the US building a crypto-powered way to stabilize or reshape a $38 trillion problem? In this video, I'm going to break down the debt pressure the US is facing right now, why Russia made this accusation, and what the US is actually building with digital dollars, dollar-backed stablecoins, and new blockchain versions of treasury bonds. We'll go through how these systems work, why they matter, and whether any version of a crypto reset is even possible. To answer all that, we need to understand the situation the US is facing. When people talk about America's debt, it usually sounds like a giant number that doesn't impact anyone's daily life. But the truth is simpler and far more connected to everything happening right now. The United States owes around $38 trillion. That's over $112,000 for every single person in America. And the way that number is growing tells you more about the system than the number itself. This isn't slow, steady borrowing. It's sharp, fast, and getting harder to balance with each passing year. The country added about $1 trillion in roughly 60 days, which is the financial equivalent of sprinting uphill with more weight every step. The real pressure comes from interest. Debt is manageable. Soaring interest costs aren't. The US is now borrowing money just to cover the interest on what it already owes, and that's the part that becomes harder to sustain. When interest grows this quickly, it forces everyone, politicians, investors, and global partners, to rethink what the system will look like in the coming years. Carrying the debt has become one of the government's largest expenses, and that pushes the system to look for new ways to operate more efficiently. The issue isn't collapse, it's cost. The current structure is getting too expensive to maintain without changes. At the same time, major foreign buyers like China and Japan have reduced their purchases of US treasuries. For decades, they helped keep America's borrowing costs low by buying huge amounts of debt. When that demand weakens, the US needs new sources of liquidity and new channels for global investors to hold American assets. That shift alone sets the stage for why digital tools, even ones as new as stablecoins and tokenized treasuries, are suddenly part of serious conversations. And once you see that the pressure is real and not just a talking point, Russia's accusation stops feeling like a dramatic stretch and starts looking like a reaction to a country trying to modernize the financial backbone that supports all this debt. Which brings us to the claim itself, and why it has gained so much attention. Russia's accusation didn't come from some random blogger or an anonymous post. It came from Anton Kobyakov, a senior advisor to Vladimir Putin. Speaking publicly at a major economic forum, he claimed the United States might be preparing to shift part of its massive debt into a digital system built around stablecoins, a system he described as a kind of crypto cloud. In his view, once the debt sits inside this new digital architecture, the US could gradually devalue it or restructure it in a way that works in America's favor and pushes more of the cost onto the rest of the world. It sounds bold, maybe even dramatic, until you realize why Russia is paying this much attention in the first place. From their perspective, the US already controls the traditional financial system. The dollar dominates global trade. Global banking flows through American institutions, and US treasuries sit at the center of global reserves. If the US successfully builds the next version of that system using digital dollars, Russia and other US rivals risk losing even more influence. To understand why Russia pointed specifically at stablecoins, you only need to look at where they're growing. In countries with unstable currencies, people are choosing dollar stablecoins instead of local money. In parts of Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, stablecoins are becoming an unofficial second banking system. Every time someone uses a stablecoin, they're effectively choosing the dollar over their national currency, and that makes Russia extremely uncomfortable. Kobyakov connected this to the US debt because to him, digital dollars look like a new lever the US can pull. If the world keeps adopting stablecoins, demand for dollars stays strong, and the stronger the global demand for dollars, the easier it is for America to keep borrowing, refinancing, and absorbing trillions in debt without losing credibility. From Russia's point of view, that looks less like modernization and more like a strategic reset disguised as innovation. But whether the accusation is accurate is a different question. To answer it, we need to step back from political framing and look at what the US is actually building. Not the rumors, the real infrastructure. And the first one is the simplest to understand: stablecoins. A stablecoin is just a digital version of a dollar that moves instantly, settles instantly, and can be used without a traditional bank. That alone makes it more convenient than most payment systems people rely on today. What makes this especially important is who's using them. Stablecoins aren't growing because Americans want faster payments. They're growing because people overseas want dollars but can't easily access the US banking system. So instead of opening a dollar account, they use a stablecoin. It gives them the stability of the dollar without the friction of local banks or the slow transfer systems that usually get in the way. And every time that happens, the dollar spreads a little further without the US lifting a finger. The second piece is tokenized treasuries. Think of a treasury bond turned into a digital token that can trade 24/7. No banking hours, no settlement delays, no layers of middlemen slowing things down. This matters because treasuries are the backbone of the entire US financial system. Making them cheaper and faster to trade opens the door to a huge new pool of buyers, especially global investors who want access but hate the complexity of traditional markets. Big institutions aren't ignoring this. BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, is already moving billions into tokenized treasury products. Major banks are testing private blockchains for settling bonds and cash. None of this is theoretical. It's happening now, and it's happening because digital rails solve problems the old system can't fix efficiently. And when you combine stablecoins and tokenized treasuries, you get something the US has wanted for decades: a faster, more convenient, more globally accessible dollar system. It doesn't replace the old one, it extends it. It gives people more reasons to use dollars and more ways to hold US debt. From a strategic standpoint, it's one of the most effective upgrades the US could hope for. This is the real foundation behind all the speculation, which makes it hard not to wonder, what does all this mean for the way the US handles its debt moving forward? Whenever people hear reset the debt, it sounds like the government could push a button and erase everything. But nothing in the US financial system works that way, and crypto doesn't change the legal reality behind debt. What it can change is how debt moves, how flexible it is, and how efficiently it can be managed. And that's where Russia's theory and the US reality start to diverge. Here's the basic truth. US debt is made of contracts. Every treasury bond is a promise to repay a lender, whether it's a government, a fund, or an individual. Moving those obligations onto a blockchain doesn't erase them. Tokenizing a bond doesn't cancel the underlying agreement. So the idea that the US could simply shift debt into a crypto system and make it disappear doesn't line up with how the markets function. But that doesn't mean nothing interesting is happening. When you put debt onto digital rails, the entire experience of managing it changes. A treasury can trade instantly worldwide. It can be used as collateral in real time. It can be held in smaller pieces, making it accessible to new categories of investors. Automated systems can handle settlement and interest with almost no friction. That efficiency is where the real advantage appears. A system that moves faster, settles faster, and reaches more people makes it easier for the US to borrow money, refinance debt, and extend the life of the financial model that already exists. That's the lever most people don't think about. America doesn't need a dramatic wipeout. It needs a smoother way to keep funding the system. Tokenization provides that smoother path. There's also a softer version of a reset that's been happening for decades: inflation. When the dollar loses value over time, the real burden of the debt shrinks. It's the slowest and least exciting tool in the toolbox, but it's the one governments rely on the most. And in a strange way, crypto rails help with this too. A world where stablecoins spread globally is a world where dollar demand stays high, even if inflation eats away at the purchasing power inside the US. This is why Russia framed the digital move the way they did. A global ecosystem built on digital dollars strengthens American influence. If the world keeps adopting stablecoins, demand for dollars stays high, giving the US more room to manage its debt. To Russia, that feels like a strategic reset, not because the debt disappears, but because the system carrying it becomes stronger. So the real point is, could these digital tools create a scenario where the US restructures or softens its debt without causing chaos? The honest answer is that anything dramatic would damage trust and the US depends on trust more than anything else. The dollar works because people believe the US will pay what it owes. No administration wants to break that belief. But restructuring the system that carries the debt, making it faster, broader, more automated, and more global, that's entirely possible, and it's already underway. Which brings us to the part that matters most to anyone watching: how all of this impacts real people, their savings, and the currency they rely on every single day. Most discussions about debt, digital dollars, and tokenized assets feel distant from everyday life, but the truth is the effects land directly on regular people long before they show up in political speeches. You feel them through rising prices, higher interest rates, and credit costs that grow even when you're not spending more. And the reason all of that connects to the broader financial system is simple. When the government carries this much debt, the pressure leaks into everything else. A more digital dollar system won't magically fix these challenges, but it does reshape the environment people have to navigate. Faster settlement, cheaper transfers, and smoother payment rails make day-to-day transactions easier. But there's another side to this shift. The government gains more efficient ways to manage the system, which can influence how inflation behaves and how money circulates. None of that changes the reality you experience directly, but it can change the pace of those pressures over time. For people who hold savings in dollars, the impact is familiar but important to point out. Inflation slowly eats away at purchasing power, and the global spread of digital dollars doesn't stop that. Instead, it helps make sure the dollar remains the center of global commerce, which indirectly supports the system the US uses to manage its debt. It doesn't protect your savings, it protects the structure the government relies on. Crypto holders feel the shift differently. Bitcoin tends to do well when trust in traditional systems dips, and digital rails make it easier for new investors to explore alternatives. But at the same time, stablecoins dominate everyday usage. People don't buy coffee with Bitcoin. They use stablecoins because they behave like familiar money. In many countries, stablecoins have already become the safe option compared to local currencies, and that strengthens the dollar's reach even further. And that's the part of the story most people miss. The growth of stablecoins isn't just a crypto trend, it's a global vote for the dollar. When you pull back and look at everything happening at once, the rise of stablecoins, the growth of tokenized treasuries, the global spread of digital dollars, the picture becomes clearer. The US isn't trying to erase its debt. It's trying to make the system that carries that debt stronger, faster, and harder to replace. That's the real strategy, and it's happening in a way that looks calm on the surface, but significant underneath. America doesn't need to reset anything if it can realign the structure around its debt so it runs more efficiently. A financial system built on digital rails moves money in ways the old system can't. It settles faster, scales easier, and reaches people who never had access to US assets before. Every time someone overseas holds a stablecoin or a tokenized treasury, demand for US dollars grows. That demand gives the government more room to operate, more time to manage rising interest costs, and more flexibility as debt expands. From Russia's perspective, this looks like a reset because it strengthens the very system they believe is already too powerful. To them, digital dollars are an upgrade to America's influence. A faster dollar is a stronger dollar, and a stronger dollar makes the US debt easier to sustain. That's why the accusation sounded dramatic. It wasn't about crypto itself. It was about what a modernized dollar system means for global power. All of this sounds like progress, but if you look at the yield curve, the same chart that's predicted almost every major recession for the last century, the picture gets a lot darker. It's signaling a downturn that could be worse than 1929 or 2008. To see why analysts are so worried, tap the video on your screen. I'll meet you there to explain everything.